I began to recognize that I was being held by some kind of being, and it was holding me like a baby, and sort of like I had a sense, although I could not see, that it was seated on the ground and holding me like a baby and just pouring love into me. You are so loved. You are so loved. And knew me, Louisa, better than I knew myself. My name is Louisa Peck, and I had a near-death experience in 1982. What I want to say is at the time that I had my near-death experience, they were not on the radar at all. I had never heard the term. Most people, vast majority of people had never heard the term. So the reason for this is that people were having them, but they were seriously getting committed to sanitariums if they talked about them. And so the first meeting of near-death experiencers was secret. It was 3 people. One of them was Kimberly Clark Sharp, who's a friend of mine. And, she had seen people taken away in, strapped to gurneys and so forth because they said that they had left their body and they had been able to see. So it was not a thing. And when I had it, I rejected it. So it took me really 20 years to tell myself it was real, and 10 years after that before I would tell anyone else that it was real. So I'll start with it. This happened in 1982 when I was 22 years old, and I was a budding alcoholic at that time, and I loved cocaine. So I hadn't had any real consequences yet. I had graduated from a good college, and I'd gone back to New York City. I was actually born in Seattle, but I went to New York City because I was chasing coolness. I kind of had these 2 goals in life. One was to be like, get super good grades and be super smart. And the other was to party and destroy my brain. So they were kind of at odds with each other. I asked a friend to come down to New York, and he had dealt cocaine in college. So I was pretty confident he would bring some. And he did. And we did a bunch in the apartment. We did some in the cab, and we went to a nightclub called the Peppermint Lounge. And I was always trying to feel like I was enough and like I was cool, and all the things that young women are kind of obsessed with, or they are always trying to be glamorous and pretty and fun and interesting and all these things. And so I felt like I was almost there, and we ran out of coke, and I just went back to my low self-esteem normal, and I wanted to get back up there. So we asked around about buying cocaine, and somebody said, this guy's selling it. So we just trusted him. We pulled together a bunch of money. At that time, I was a bus girl at a fancy restaurant, so I carried around a lot of cash, and we were able to buy, and I can't remember now if it was a half a gram or a gram, can't remember, of white stuff. And we put it on our lips, and it numbed them. So we bought it thinking, okay, that's what coke does. Many years later, I would learn that it was not cocaine at all. It was lidocaine, and all lidocaine is like Novocaine that the dentist gives you. It doesn't get you high at all. It just numbs your nerves. But I was ingesting it internally, which means it's going to numb all the internal nerves from your brain to your heart, and for your breathing. Lidocaine poisoning is people die from it every year. But I didn't know that. My friend did a line and just said, you know what we had? I don't know if this is baby powder or what. And I said, it can't be baby powder because it numbed our gums. So I just snorted the whole pile, thinking maybe it was just really bad coke and I would get a little bit high. So had no idea I'd been poisoned, had no idea I was dying. I went to use the restroom, and in line for the restroom. I was, even though on the way there, I started having tunnel vision. A lot of my external peripheral vision was just going away. And when I was in the stall, it seemed like the room was getting dark. My brain was starving for oxygen. I didn't know that. And I couldn't read any of the graffiti. And when I realized I couldn't read anything, I knew something was weird, and I felt like there was no air. So I came out, I found my date. I said, there's no air down here. There's no air, because this club that played New Wave was in the basement. I was all into New Wave then. And so he took me to the bartender. They both said, calm down, calm down. And I felt angry because nobody else seemed to be recognizing this fact that there was no air, because by then I was trying to breathe as hard as I could. But my heart rate was probably down to like 20 beats a minute, so it wasn't getting to my brain. So the bartender said he was going to give me a glass of water. I said, okay, even though I didn't want it. And I took a sip, and it seemed to me in that instant that something slammed me under my chin. And I thought I had collapsed and hit my chin on the bar, because I was standing at the bar. But in real life, I mean, not in real life I had what I had, but in physical life, in 3D life, I fell over backwards, had a grand mal seizure that went on for a while, and then a cardiac arrest. And then the bartender started doing CPR, and it was his best guess was over 3 minutes of non-response to CPR. Because how's it going to help me? You can't get the heart to start again just by pumping it if all this lidocaine is still in your system. So that's not what was happening for me, though. For me, it seemed like I was shot out of a cannon or something, shot, like I like to say, that Popeye punched me, and I went sailing up in the air, and I felt so relieved. And I had a sense of Manhattan and the whole kind of bad scene down there receding away from me and a little bit to my left. And I just thought, oh, thank God, that whole business of being Louisa, trying wasn't working out for me. So I'm really glad it's over. Nothing about, oh, I've died, nothing like that. I'm just bye-bye. So I was sailing up into the air, into the blue sky, and I felt so free. And I also felt kind of like I can do anything. And I wanted to do a back bend. I could see that the ocean was beyond me, going all the way around the horizon, this perfect blue ocean. And so I thought, I'll do a back bend and I'll dive into the ocean. And it worked out perfect. And I did that, and then the ocean was way down below me, and I thought, I wonder if it's going to be like concrete when I hit it, because I've heard that. And I thought, well, we'll just find out. And again, once you're out of your body, you just don't have any fear, because what's going to happen to you? You're just energy, right? So I hit the water and just pierced it and went way down deep. And I could see the bubbles around me rising. And again, I just had this sense of like joy and freedom. And the bubbles were so beautiful and the surface was so beautiful. But I thought, that's a long way up there. I don't know if I can get there in time. I didn't have a sense of holding my breath either. I just had a sense of like, isn't this a problem? And again, no fear. And instantly I'm surfacing, because none of these things are physical. They are energetic representations of me moving ahead toward the other side. So the next thing was I saw land and a beach, and I wanted to be there. I do remember that I just started to swim, and then I was wading out, and I just didn't question it at all. I'm like, that's good. And once I was on the beach, which was not a tropical beach, it was kind of more like the kind I'm used to in the Pacific Northwest, which is barnacles and rocks and stuff. It was that kind of beach. And I saw down the beach, I saw an old blue house that was up on a mesa. And you can also call them sea stacks or something. It's like if the ocean has eroded away everything except for a column of land. And on top of that kind of pillar of land, there was an old weather-worn house, had been pale blue, but it just looked like, the shingles were starting to come off and all like that. But I thought, I need to go there. That has to do with me. And so instead of just being instantly at the house, though, I was at the bottom of that mesa and I could see that it was a bunch of slabs of rock and stuff like that. And they were all covered with this gross, repulsive, putrid slime. And my thought at the time was just, is this rotten seaweed or what? But it was actually all of my negative coping mechanisms, negative ways of being in the world, trying to manipulate people, being vain, like all these different things that I did. That's what the slime was. And I had to climb past it to get to the house. So I was like, I can do this. I had a sense of being powerful. And so I climbed past it, was no problem. Next thing I knew, I was at the door sill, which I was very psyched about, but I was only this high above the door sill. And I had somehow lost my body in the process of climbing. It might have had too much vanity attached to it. I don't know what. I don't know why I shed it, but I shed my body. And so by the time I was there, I was just like a subjective camera and I could see the wood of the floor super close up and it was very, very worn. And I understood as soon as I crossed it that it was worn from all my ancestors having come this same way, and had a great sense of honor that I was following my ancestors. Now, back on Earth, that 22-year-old Louisa, who wants to go to clubs all the time and stuff, did not care at all about my ancestors. Forgetting their names, you know, even my grandparents, I didn't see my grandparents very often, and whoever came before them, you know, I didn't really know or care. But I sensed all of them, like going back many, many generations, were there. And I could feel their like joy that now it was my turn and I was going to join them. So I felt honored. And one in particular, my grandfather, my father's father, who he died before I was born. He was the one I felt most clearly. I was really excited to meet me. But again, all I could see was the house and I could feel their presence. So there was supposed to be an armchair in the middle of the room and it was supposed to face a great big picture window with a view of the ocean, and it wasn't there. I'm only this far from the floor and I'm like, well, there's no chair. And, you know, how am I it's my turn to look at the beautiful ocean. I want to see it. And as soon as I said, I want to see it, somebody else took over control of my experience. And I didn't know who, I didn't know what was happening. I just knew something was pulling me across the floor. And then I was like, whoa, but sort of like that sense of fun that you have when a roller coaster starts. I wasn't at all alarmed by it. We got closer to the windowsill. I have no idea what's going to happen. We go up over the windowsill and out, and then I'm flying over the ocean. And all I sense is this huge exhilaration and just joy at the feeling of zooming ahead. I think it's why people like to ski and why people like to drive fast cars. We love to zoom ahead. And I think it mimics this sense of raising our vibration, which is what was happening to me on the other side. But I didn't know that. I was zooming over the ocean and the sun was setting directly in front of me, making a path across the ocean. And that's what I zoomed over, like it was a highway of gold. And then the sun was all, you know, lighting up the sky in these colors. And I just got a skeptical thought from Louisa back on Earth. And it was just like, wait a second, you know, people dream they can fly all the time. Is this real? And then somebody answered me. And it was an answer that resonated in me rather than in my ears. And it said, more real than anything back there. And it kind of like indicated that whole scruffy mess that had been Louisa trying to live on Earth. It just was like more real than any of that physical stuff you had been doing. And so even though I was very surprised to have someone answer my wondering, I had to agree that I did understand what they meant, that it was more real now, that this was the most real I had ever felt anything to be, just electric living, just so present. And the sun was getting bigger and bigger. And again, I had one of those thoughts, like, am I going to vaporize? And again, no fear, but I could begin to see the corona on the sun, and I thought, this, I don't know what else can happen but vaporizing. But instead, I sort of passed through this filament, and I was inside the sun. And this is significant for me because my father, who was a strong atheist after having Catholicism shoved down his throat all through his youth, he had taught me that all of my energy comes from the sun. That every plant I eat, or every animal, I used to eat animals, I'm vegetarian now, but that it all comes through photosynthesis from the sun. And that is what makes all of us. So that was my vision of my creator, I guess you could say, was the sun, and I was in it, and there was the light. Now, I had never heard of the light. A lot of people who watch NDE videos, you're going to hear about it a lot because that's what's there. And it just saturated me with warmth. It is a warm feeling, delicious warm feeling. And took me a second to realize it was love. And it was not just love. I mean, when someone loves you, or you feel a lot of love, it's kind of going, peep, 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 you're trying. I love my son so much, but it's just kind of always mixed up with other things that are happening. And this was just like, whoo, it just like completely inundated me with more love. The only limit, I like to say, the only limit was how much I could absorb. And I began to recognize that I was being held by some kind of being, and it was holding me like a baby, and sort of like I had a sense, although I could not see, that it was seated on the ground and holding me like a baby and just pouring love into me. You are so loved. You are so loved. And knew me, Louisa, better than I knew myself. From first that I was ever a spark in my parents' eyes, whatever, this being had watched me and knew me and loved me and was telling me how beloved I was. And I just wanted to stay there forever because I loved the parent, although I didn't know what it was, but I just felt so perfect. And then the parent said, again in that telepathic way, he said, you can't stay, you're not done yet. And then boom. And I'm still like, what do you mean I'm not done yet? What do you mean I can't stay? Because I have no concept of either. I had really forgotten all about the world, so I didn't know stay where. But then when the lights went out, I knew it had meant stay with them in the light. And then when they said you weren't done yet, that just seemed to me like nonsense. That's a dumb reason. Done with what? Like it didn't have any sense to me. So many NDEers, again, are told the same thing on the other side. So I had a brief sensation when it went all to black of dropping through space. And that was my vibration falling as I headed back for my body. And then I felt fear and rage. And they all went, it happened so fast. It was like the rage and the fear and the falling, and it was all instantaneous, but I wanted to kick the parent in the shins. I was so angry. I had that sense of like, I'll show them. But I didn't have any feet. I didn't have any hands. I didn't, it's all energetic. So if anybody tells you that, they kicked and screamed literally, I would doubt it. But I had that feeling of wanting to do that. And it's because I was re-entering my body. And I feel like we are all surrounded by a kind of sheath of stuff that's meant to keep us in our bodies, which is, fear, so that we will avoid hazard, and anger, so that we will defend ourselves. And so passing back through them, I felt them both strongly. But then it was kind of gone, and I just saw a black space that was like a blackboard, and there were little figures that seemed to be drawn with chalk. And I saw them, I kind of got closer, they got closer. They had like all of these jungle gym swing set climbing stuff, and they were all playing like little kids, and they were saying little silly rhymes, no sense, like how many hopscotch, like a hippo or something like that. I just silly things, but I thought they were funny. And I thought, okay, parent gave me this until I can go back to the light. So I guess I'm just going to watch it like Saturday morning cartoons until I can go back. That was my plan. And one of the stick figures got closer, and the chalk circle filled in solid, more like a dinner plate. And then I realized it wasn't saying a silly rhyme. It was saying how many fingers what is your name? And then this horrible realization came over me that I was back in the world, and I remembered it. And I thought, oh God, this is so dumb. I can't go back to this like silly back and forth of making noise in your throat. And like, I call it kind of like burping sounds. That's what it seemed like to me then. And it's in code. So I send one to you and you send one back to me. And like with the telepathy, even though I'd only barely had a taste of it, it was so natural that you just know things that someone wants you to know. And I also felt like my mouth, which he wanted me to move, was very far away and very difficult to move, you know, and sort of like if you're in an apartment building and there's a garage downstairs, that's where my tongue seemed to be. But I eventually figured out how to move it. And I said, Louisa, and I said 2 for his fingers. And then I was back. So I was lying on the floor of the nightclub, and I had a huge puddle of what I thought was water around me. I thought they had thrown water at me like they do in the movies to wake people up. But I learned later that when I returned to my body, all of this sweat poured out of me. I've seen other people be revived from a cardiac arrest and the same thing. But I didn't, like, other things happened, but I had just been to the bathroom. It was all just sweat. And so I don't know, they got me up, and I had a sense of like these people, there's a huge crowd around me, and I said, they think something happened here. They don't know what really happened. They don't know what happened there. And I had this kind of, it's almost like a 5-year-old child. I've heard other people come back, especially because your brain sort of been through a lot, but I just kind of felt this, you know, like they don't know what happened. And we went up to wait for the ambulance, but as soon as I figured out that the ambulance was for me, I was like, no, 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 no. I told my date, I'm not going. I'm not going in the ambulance. I'm not going into the hospital, because I just thought if my parents found out what had happened, they would be so, I would never hear the interview. I would not be allowed to stay there. I mean, I didn't know what they would do, but I knew it would be bad. So I was like, can't we just go? And so there was, you know, in front of the nightclub, all of these yellow cabs waiting, and he just said, come on, grabbed my hand. And he ran and jumped in one. All the people, oh, I forgot the part about the bartender came over and talked to my friend. And he said, my friend had said, I actually told you to stop, you know, because it wasn't working. 3 minutes is a long time. And the bartender came to me and said, you were gone for more than 3 minutes. We weren't sure you were coming back. And I was just embarrassed. That's all I felt. You got to picture me. I'm 22, and I've got a Pat Benadar haircut at that point. I'm smoking already. And I just kind of looked at him and said, yeah, thanks. That was all I could do then. So I never went to a hospital, and it was never confirmed. But when I woke up in the morning, the next day, my head was covered with lumps, and my arms were covered with bruises on my knuckles. And the worst of all was my rib cage was super sore. Taking a deep breath was very painful because of all the compressions. So I was back, but this is hard to explain to people. But I had, like, that afternoon, I sat down to write the whole thing down, and then I had to decide if it was real. And I knew in my heart that it was real. There were a lot of things I knew in my heart that I didn't listen to. I felt I could kind of make my own reality. You know, I knew it was wrong to lie to people, but I lied to people. You know, I knew it was wrong to be drinking and doing cocaine and so forth destructively the way I was, but I just did them. And it seemed to me that if I accepted this, because I had no reference point other than religion, I would have to go to church. And I would have to turn into a good girl, do Bible studies, hang out with churchy people. And I was chasing this scene in New York City, and I wanted to keep chasing it. So I just ignored what I knew was really true and just said it had to be something in my brain. So maybe when your brain is shutting down from not getting enough oxygen, maybe like the things you're aware of get less and less and less until there's just a little spark that seems enormous. It seems like the sun is love. That's maybe your starting point of your life. So that's what I'm going to say it was. And it's just a great story about, I still thought I had done cocaine. And so I was done with it. And that was going to be the end of my story. Now, I don't often get to talk in videos about how long it took me to realize this was real. I became depressed, didn't know why, but this also happens to near-death experiencers. And it wasn't for 5 years before I saw a ghost. And this was my first sign that I was not the same. 5 years later, I was walking on the beach in Gloucester, Massachusetts, very early in the morning, kind of caught up in this romantic intrigue that I was all about. I was all about the drama and romantic intrigue. And so I was married, but I was in love with this woman and la la la, but she was with her boyfriend. So I went out on the beach in this storm at 7 in the morning to just be like, oh, you know, and like rail against fate, sort of like King Lear. I was an English major. But anyway, it was about another person on the beach, crazy as I was, way down. And where he appeared from, there were no houses. There was a great big bog. There was like, he came over the dunes where there was kind of swampy area behind it. And I thought, where's he coming from? What's he up to? And then I realized he had this killer vintage rain gear on. And I didn't know where he'd gotten it from, but I could tell by the way it moved. It was that yellow stuff, Macintosh genuine. They used to spray rubber on cloth, and he had the haircut, the hat and everything. And I like to say he was like Mr. Fish Sticks. That's what he looked like. He had the whole Fish Sticks outfit on. And this is the time of Madonna by then, and I'm way into vintage. So I wanted to ask him where he got it, because I'm thinking, I've got this thought, maybe I can get some cool clothes there too. But he's just looking at the horizon like this. So I'm coming this way, he's going that way, and we're going to intersect. And I originally thought, I'm going to ask him when I get there where he got that rain gear. But then as I see him more and more, he's like looking, he looks really upset. So it's like, he's not going to want to talk about vintage clothes. So I just, as I passed behind him, right behind him, I saw his skin was all kind of broken capillaries, his eyes kind of bloodshot, he drank too much. I just said, how's it going? And I saw his eye move a tiny bit. And by then I passed behind him, right behind him. And I went on another 10 steps or so, and I thought, what a jerk. Like, we're the only 2 people out in this horrible storm. He's looking at a horizon that isn't even there. And eventually I came back to look for his tracks, and mine were the only tracks on the beach. And so I was not ready to say ghost. When I got back to the house where people were staying in Gloucester and told them what had happened, then our hostess said, oh, well, you know, there's 1,000 ships have gone down here in Gloucester over the years, and there's a big list of drowned sailors, at downtown, and so you saw a ghost. And for me, that was just ridiculous. But somewhere way back in my mind, I knew this is another weird thing. There's the weird thing of that time I left my body, and then there's this weird thing with seeing a ghost. The next one was knowing my nephew was going to die. The next one was when my angel, as I call him now, the same voice, caused me to get sober. And I'm just going to give a plug for my 2 books. So this book is for alcoholics. It's just for alcoholics. It's my whole story. If you've been to AA and you love AA, think of this as a speaker meeting that goes on for 8 hours. And it winds through the first, I think, 14 weird after effects. After 14, that's when I was willing to go to IANS and come out publicly as having had this stuff. But then I was at an AA meeting, and this woman literally said, I don't want to read your whole story. I just want to read about the weird stuff. And so I was like, okay, let's write another one that's just about the weird stuff. So this is for normal people, and it's just called Die Hard Atheist, from NDE denier to full-on woo-woo. And so this goes past the first 14 weird things, and some of the ones I've had more recently are way weirder. I've also interviewed a whole lot of near-death experiencers to see all the common threads between my near-death experience and theirs. And I want Mo to ask me a question, but first I just want to explain that when you think you are the only one that this is happening to, it feels so grandiose. And you just don't dare say, I knew my nephew was going to die the instant I heard, about the pregnancy. Or I was told, don't go at this stoplight when it turned green, so I didn't go, and then a car raced through. Like, when it's happening to you and there's a voice talking to you, you feel like you're, saying, oh, I'm the second coming, or something like that, right? You feel like you're saying some huge claim. And so I was ashamed of that. When I finally heard about ions, heard about near-death experiences, it was kind of similar to when I first went to Alcoholics Anonymous, because everybody did what I did, and in Alcoholics Anonymous, I wasn't this like total freaky person. I was just had this disease. When I went to ions, I realized I wasn't some grandiose, person claiming all this stuff. I was just a garden variety near-death experiencer. And that was just normal in both cases. So that's how I feel about it now. I have a lot of near-death experience friends, and I hear from dead people a lot. And I can talk about anything that Mo wants to ask me about.